Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
Growing up modern Orthodox, I always really connected to the character of Esther in Megillat Esther. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. One is that she's beautiful and strong and the hero in the center of a story. And a lot of our other female characters are often marginal. I did connect to Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, but not in the same way. And I think that's partially because the character of Esther is really colored in for us in the Purim Megillah. And that's partially because we dress up as Esther, right? That opportunity for us to don her clothing and to walk around and look like her builds that connection. And even more so, she was a princess. I mean, I was a young girl who loved Jasmine, who loved Cinderella, and Esther fit those models. She was like them, but even more so, she's the heroine of her story, right? She is the one who saves the Jewish people. And the story is one that fits into the fairy tale structure that kids are used to in a lot of ways, right? There's this very clear heroine with Esther, her trusty sidekick Mordecai, and then we have the villain of Haman. And as kids, you get to boo Haman and you get to boo his sons and you get to cheer for Esther and Mordecai, and it's exciting and it's meaningful. But what I've found interesting is that as an adult, I don't really see the story of Esther in that way at all. And that a story that had felt very black and white as a child, now all of a sudden feels very gray and different. And I still admire Esther, but I admire her in a very different way than I admired her as a young girl. One of the reasons I think that Esther is so easy to connect to is she's an orphan, and we know literature loves an orphan. We have Jane Eyre, Harry Potter, Oliver Twist. She fits into a similar model because she too has no origin. We don't know her parents, and because she has no origin, there's endless possibilities to who she can become. And she does become something great. But I think as an adult, what you see in her greatness is that it's complicated. Esther becoming a queen is not a glorious moment for her. And she has this position of power, but she's very unsure about how to use that power. It's a privilege, but it's complicated. And in certain ways, she's a prisoner in this role that wasn't clear to me when I was younger. Now you really get to the heart of this in Perek Daled, in the fourth Perek of the Megillah. We have Mordecai come and say, "U'Mordecai yadat kol asher na'aseh, v'yikra Mordecai et begadav, v'yalvash sak ve'ever, v'yetze b'toch ha'ir, v'yitzak tza'aka gedola u'mara." When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly. Vayavo ad lifnei sha'ar hamelech, ki ein lavo al sha'ar hamelech bilvush sak, until he came in front of the palace gates, for one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloths. Now Mordecai, he hears about the destruction of the Jews, and he puts on his mourning clothing, and he walks through the city, and he protests, and he publicly shows his outcry until he gets to the palace where he can't enter anymore. And you really see this divide between Mordecai and Esther because he's trying to directly talk to her, but she doesn't even know why he's mourning. She says, "Why are you in this sackcloth?" And the fact that she doesn't even say it to him directly is so important. Hatach, the messenger, has to pass messages back and forth between them, which shows how distant she's become and how far she feels from the world that she came from. Mordecai is asking for her to help the Jewish people, and she doesn't think she can do anything. She doesn't want to take on this role. And because she won't take on this role, Mordecai must say something to her. And what he says to shift her is really important. And this is in Pasuk Yodaled, the 14th Pasuk. Ki'im hacharesh tacharishi be'et hazot, revach v'hatzala ya'amod liyudi mimakom acher, va'at uvet avicha tovedu, umi yodea im la'et kazot higat l'malchut. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Now, Mordecai has to remind her, you are part of the Jewish people. And perhaps because you are part of the Jewish people were you put in this position of privilege. And this is the role that you have to take on. This is maybe the role you were always supposed to take on. And he needs to tell her that. And after that moment, Esther takes on the role and she decides that she's going to do something. But what I think is really significant is that she doesn't behave the same way he does. She doesn't go put on sackcloths and go into the city. She takes on a different role. She's strategic. She thinks about her position and she thinks, what can I do? And she doesn't just make one dinner party to tell Achashverosh. She makes multiple dinner parties. And she even sets up Haman to upset Achashverosh and make him think that he should be jealous of Haman, who's trying to court her. And she makes all these small strategic moves in making these multiple meals. And only through these meals and through this delicate strategy is she able to tell Achashverosh the truth, and is she able to, in fact, save the Jewish people. And I think this is such an important approach I didn't appreciate when I was younger. Now, to think more about this approach, I actually want to bring up a different text, and that is the book, The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Now, The Testaments is the sequel to the original book, The Handmaid's Tale, that was written 30 years ago. Margaret Atwood felt like she needed to write the sequel because of our current political climate, and the original and the sequel are about a dystopic future in a place called Gilead, where women have no control and men control everything. And The Testaments, which is the second part, is about how Gilead is destroyed. And the way that Gilead actually falls is all because of this one character named Aunt Lydia. Now, Aunt Lydia is one of the most powerful women we meet in the book. And she basically stays in this position of power, does a lot of morally gray things to be there. She hurts many men, many women, but her ultimate goal is actually to destroy Gilead. And she slowly saves up all the right information so that eventually, and if this is a spoiler, so if you haven't read, if you want to read the Testaments, you should stop listening. But she basically slowly, she's the one who brings it down. And Lydia talks about what it's like to be in this position, and I'm just going to read what she describes. My larger fear that all my efforts will prove futile and Gilead will last for 1,000 years. Most of the time, that is what it feels like here, far away from the war, in the still heart of the tornado. So peaceful the streets, so tranquil, so orderly, yet underneath the deceptively placid surfaces, a tremor like that near a high-voltage power line. We're stretched thin, all of us. We vibrate, we quiver, we're always on the alert. Reign of terror, they used to say, but terror does not exactly reign. Instead, it paralyzes, hence the unnatural quiet. I think of Esther in that palace. I think of how terrified and paralyzed she must have been, how it must have been like being in the heart of a tornado, quiet, and she had to act. It did not feel like what it was like for Mordecai outside the palace walls, and yet she breaks free of this paralysis. So what I want to share with you is, let's relook at this story. Let's understand that maybe it's not that black and white I saw as a child, that there are not necessarily clear, easy heroes and villains, and that it's never really easy in life to find clear heroes and villains. But maybe more importantly, let's try to look at the positions that we sit in society. Let's use the story of Esther to rethink what heroism looks like, and to realize that many of us are in positions of privilege. And how can we be strategic and use these positions of privilege to bring about real change?